something, right? Stand by, please, Charles. We're live. Just overcoming the usual last-minute stuff that always seems to occur. Today is going to be a slightly unusual episode. You're not exactly closing in, and I would like to thank you, Charles, for accommodating my travel schedule. We had originally not exactly planned on doing a closing in show today, but last night's speech from President Trump and the follow-up from Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer was so substantial, I felt it was important for us to discuss it. How are you, Charles?
I'm great, Jason. Thanks for asking. I hope you're safe and well.
I am doing well. It's good to see you even remotely. I know you don't particularly like Skype, but we've got you on a voice call here today. Wanted to do a little bit of follow-up. I think most people saw President Trump's speech last night. I don't really need, let me just play just a brief, if I can get it to play. Is it playing there?
My fellow Americans,
there we go. Okay, let's just
tonight I am
President
speaking
Trump for
to
a
you
moment.
because there is a growing humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border. Every day, Customs and Border Patrol agents encounter thousands of illegal immigrants trying to enter our country. We are out of space to hold them, and we have
I think
no
everybody
way to
watched the
promptly
speech,
return
Charles,
them.
and if they haven't, of course, they can go online and see it. But basically, the case that President Trump was making is that we've got having open borders just invites criminals to enter the country. And even if people aren't criminals, we've got some Democrats, including Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who have suggested that healthcare should be free, college should be free, all of these social services should be free, and on top of that, we should just let anyone from around the world who wants to come to the United States and take advantage of these programs come right in. How could that possibly work from a mathematical and economic standpoint?
Well, of course it doesn't. And I think, the proper committee assignment for AOC is to be chair of the House committee that will plan the welcoming ceremonies for the first alien civilization to reach this planet. I mean, she's obviously economically illiterate. And it's really sad testament to whatever training she had at the public high school, wherever she went to high school, and then on to, I think it's either George Washington University or some American university or something like that. I mean, somebody give her credit for beating the incumbent Crowley in the primary. He was a force to be reckoned with. Some even said he might have been a contender to be Speaker of the House. Give her credit for that amazing victory, because it really was amazing. And then obviously she runs from a left-leaning district that's a safe seat for Democrats, so no Republican was going to beat her. But the danger of what she's doing by yapping away the way she's yapping so frequently, never letting a crisis go to waste, as Rahm Emanuel Obama used to say. Nonetheless, it's very dangerous to spew economically illiterate garbage out of your mouth 24/7. I mean, the notion, I don't think this person has any freaking clue how much wealth the United States of America has, everybody put together, what things cost, whether or not the healthcare system at present is a system that should just be financed ad nauseum, or whether it needs structural reform. I look around at healthcare costs around the major economies. And for some strange reason, our cost per capita is so much higher than other countries of comparable economic standing. So why is that? Do we have a legal system run amok where doctors have to overpay for insurance and where legal settlement costs are so high? Do we have structural impediments to bringing costs down? I mean, there are lots of tough questions that need to be asked, not let's just give everybody as much money as we want.
Well, and not only that, Charles, if you do start instituting those programs, it just would encourage people. I mean, if we implemented all the things that Democrats like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is talking about, it's basically like putting a sign on your house that says free food, anybody can sleep over, leaving the door unlocked, and then, how many people would come over and take advantage of that, and how could a person sustain that? Let's say you're working your normal job and you live in a modest home and you just started inviting every homeless person into your house. Now, helping the homeless is something that is virtuous and something that we should all do, but it's got to be done in an organized fashion. You can't just allow an unlimited number of people to come and live off of your individual resources. It's simply an impractical idea, and that's why we've named today's episode DUMBY. I hope that people can make it out. I was in a rush to make the graphic today, but we've got Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez in the titular role of DUMBY, and then we've got, of course, Chucky Schumer as Pokey, Gumby's horse, but he actually worked out in this picture quite well to look like a devil. And we've also got Nancy Pelosi as, I forget what Gumby's girlfriend's name is, but this is DUMBY here today. It turns out, Charles, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez actually went to Boston University. Now, I want to ask you a question here. Boston University is a private university. I'm pretty sure it's extremely expensive to go there. She doesn't seem, off the top, to be... I'm not trying to insult her. I'm trying to make a realistic evaluation here. She doesn't strike me as a genius, so getting some kind of scholarship to BU, did she have that? I mean, she's trying to paint herself as this underprivileged minority candidate who, uh-oh, are we not live for some reason? Is something going wrong here? I think I might have screwed something up, Charles. I hope we're live. No, we're live. Okay. She doesn't seem to be someone who could have gotten a scholarship in my estimation. So how is she paying for this? Is she being genuine in her representation of herself?
I don't think so. I mean, the second plank here, education, I mean, we've talked about this in numerous broadcasts, and I certainly enjoyed and was privileged to go to some wonderful universities and private school my whole life. And I value education. I actually think you can't really easily delegate education away from parents to public schools or even the best private schools in the world. You have to instill a lifelong interest in learning in children early on, and that will then, generally speaking, pique the kind of intellectual curiosity which is warranted here. In the case of Ocasio-Cortez, she was quoted on 60 Minutes. Now, she deserves credit for being the youngest currently serving congressperson. She has asked about ridiculous errors that she'd made, factual errors in terms of the cost of things and not understanding just how absurdly expensive some of her proposals are. And her answer was to say, well, those are just factual misstatements. What I care about is moral relevance or something like that. I mean,
right.
Come on.
She said it's more important to be morally whatever than factual. It was so crazy, Charles, this conversation between Ocasio-Cortez and Anderson Cooper about the importance of being factually accurate. I mean, could we have had two less qualified people discussing that subject?
Was Al Franken unavailable to be the interviewer? That's why they had Anderson. Has he recovered from New Year's Eve?
It doesn't make sense to me, but I want to speak about the authenticity of this candidate because she's receiving so much attention. It almost seems like, I mean, I remember when Britney Spears came out, right? I'm not exactly dialed into the teeny bopper music scene, but it felt very much like she appeared out of nowhere, and from the beginning, they were treating her like a pop sensation, and that's what they made her into. I can't help but feel like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez has the same kind of aura about her, like a creation of a PR machine where somebody decided, we've got this, attractive female Hispanic candidate who, sort of ticks off all the right boxes. She's a minority, she's a female candidate, she could be the youngest candidate ever, so she appeals to millennials. They're covering her, they're giving more coverage of her in Teen Vogue than certainly any political candidate ever. So it's almost as if the Democrats are grooming the next generation. You know, they're really gunning for, I mean, who knows, she could be a presidential candidate someday because it's got more to do with popularity. I think that is sort of what the Democrats have decided. They look at Trump and they say, look, you know, here's a guy who just came out and had the popularity and won and just say whatever he wants. Why can't we do that? And it seems like Ocasio-Cortez is the anti-Trump.
Well, it would certainly seem, if we think about it, that for a bit that the bar for intellectual rigor in really both parties, but starting with the Democratic Party. I mean, you have now Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, somebody who, during the effort to pass Obamacare, denied Congress the ability to look at the details, and then said we have to pass this bill to find out what's in it. I mean, and people in her party didn't say, "No, wait a minute, you bozo."
Yeah.
You know, that's so far away. Imagine if the shoe's on the other foot. Imagine if Trump were to say, when Republicans regain the House and as they expand their lead in the Senate, which I think could happen in 2020 in certain circumstances. Imagine if Trump in his second term started behaving that way and saying, all right, whoever's the leader of the Senate and the House, you're not going to get to see, if you're in the other party, you see nothing, and you have to vote to pass every bill we're going to put together from 2021 to 2024. You have to pass them in order to read them. Yeah. I mean, I think you'd have heads exploding across rightfully so, across the editorial and media platforms, saying this is dictatorial. And so I think it's an open question whether Ocasio-Cortez is smarter or dumber than Nancy Pelosi. But I don't think we're talking about standing in, like the top half of the class. I think we're fighting for, the bottom 75th to 99th percentile here.
Right. But they've got everybody talking about her. That's the point. I mean, she's definitely the political it girl of 2019. And, she's talking about, everybody. Anderson Cooper was talking to her about her proposals to, she's hitting all the high points, green and the environment. I mean, look, obviously we all live on this planet, want the environment to be healthy and good. But this notion that they're going to pass legislation to get everybody to drive electric cars, that's not even a fully gestated idea in terms of, does it help the environment? How are we generating the electricity to put into the batteries of the electric cars? How are we mining the rare earth elements that make those batteries? What happens to these batteries once those cars are no longer drivable after they've exhausted their useful life? What's the manufacturing process like? These are all new technologies. Electric cars haven't been around that long. And, you were one of the first people to cause me to think in this direction when I was in South Dakota and spoke with Professor Jimmy at the mining school over there. He raised an amazing point. They've developed a metal compound that is the lowest friction metal known. And the idea is if you built an engine out of that, well, perhaps it would be very expensive. But if we invested in maybe manufacturing that metal and made a car with a low friction engine, what if you could use gasoline to travel 100 miles on a gallon of gas, and we could leave our existing infrastructure for fueling stations and not have to change all this technology, and perhaps that might be better for the environment in the long run. So my concern is when we get someone who is ignorant, and I'm not saying that to insult Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's just a fact. She seems to be quite ignorant in areas of science, economics, politics. I mean, it's amazing to me that she got elected, and in fact, it smacks of something inauthentic. I was speaking with Larry Klayman about the prospect of Laura Loomer running for political office in Florida. Now, Laura was the valedictorian of her class at college. She's incredibly active politically. She's much more well-informed than even people I know who are twice her age. And Larry spoke to me in great detail about some of the challenges that Laura would face. How does a 29-year-old woman who conceivably was working as a waitress, how does she win? Is it authentic?
Doesn't strike me as terribly authentic. I think the correct pronunciation of ignorant when we're talking about Cortez is ignorant. And I also think, I also think that while you were talking, I was just imagining, I'm communing with the art department from afar, but I'm just imagining that there maybe should be new lyrics for the "It's Not Easy Being Green" song,
Hmm.
and it ought to involve Dumby singing, and maybe it ought to involve either a rap beat or Hispanic, Pitbull style beat. And I think it would be pretty damn amusing, especially if you get those, what are those cars called? The low riders? That
Exactly.
go,
Get Cortez in a lowrider. That might be racist, Charles.
it's not, and I can say my mother is Portuguese, so technically under the law, I used to be deemed a Hispanic surnamed American, even though, of course, Portuguese people do not view themselves as Hispanic. It has nothing to do with racism. It has everything to do with humor.
I'm just teasing you, of course. We all know you're extremely open-minded. Let's shift for a moment. Speaking of inauthentic, Charles, let's shift for a moment to the bizarre presentation by The Walking Dead. I mean, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. What do you make of their response to President Trump's speech? Well, perhaps, sorry, let me take a step back. I think we should start with the president's speech. He basically got on there and said, without border security, without a wall, without the proper funding, we have criminals, we have human trafficking, we have drugs coming across the border, and everyone is saying that this is a manufactured crisis. Now, is it untrue that Mexican cartels and other criminals are bringing drugs and raping women and charging people? We've heard about these coyotes who charge people to smuggle them. I've seen images of, upholstered car seat costumes that people wear to look like the seat of a car. There's all kinds of schemes that people use, and it's extremely dangerous. So don't we want to discourage this kind of illegal immigration? What the Democrats are promoting seems not only disingenuous, but dangerous.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also, again, it's the contrast. To register to the American public, it's the contrast that I think President Trump and others need to hit hard on. So here, on the other hand, on the one hand, we have, as you say, AOC lauded on 60 Minutes for proposing, one $20 trillion program, Medicare for all, or alternatively, I forget, it's $13 trillion for her Green New Deal, right? And it's
Right.
like, wow, that's wonderful. Let's spend $33 trillion immediately. Let's do it, because I mean, this 29-year-old who doesn't understand economics, she thinks we should do this. We got to get right on it. And on the other hand, here you got Trump the builder, somebody who's actually built projects before, many, many projects, looking hard at this concept of, what's the best way to protect America after decades of politicians of both parties saying, oh, yeah, it's a problem, we'll get right on it, and doing nothing. Here's a guy saying, no, we're going to get it done. And I can get it done in this tranche for $5 billion. $5 billion, just hint to those who have trouble with math, $5 billion is a lot less than $33 trillion. And, oh, no, Nancy Pelosi, for that, I'll give you $1. But for AOC's plans, whatever you want, sky's the limit. Bring me something with $1 trillion in it, I'm all in. Or, contrast that to Obama's stimulus program back in 2009, which was, I think, from memory, around $800 billion. And he joked with Immelt, who was in charge of, figuring out which shovel-ready jobs were ready. That one cost us $800 billion and did bupkis.
Right.
So, I mean, the double standard here of Democrats saying, not $1, versus let's spend $33 trillion is absurd. And then, there's some things you don't debate. I mean, I think if you came back from a trip and you walked into your apartment and you discovered, a family from Honduras, eating what remained in your refrigerator and asking you what you were doing in their house,
Right.
I think that would be a very short discussion.
Right.
And there's some things you're willing to debate and some things you're not willing to debate. Any idiot who wants to stand up and say that the United States of America, as the largest, richest country on earth, should not defend its borders is an idiot. I mean, it's just that simple.
Yeah.
And actually, I think Trump's maneuver, this novice politician who's only been doing this for now, if you count his running, 3 years, one running, for two, I guess, 4 years now, it's in his fourth year. Two, let's call it running, and two in office. This guy has flipped the political stage. He's got all these nimrods, Schumer and Pelosi, defending the indefensible, or trying to. We shouldn't be spending money defending our borders, when day after day, sadly, there's another tale of one illegal immigrant or another, getting involved. Recently, I guess it was a traffic accident that killed a whole family, I think of 5 people. And I really, as Trump, wouldn't. I'm glad he walked out of the discussions today. I wouldn't waste any time or energy with people who are just holding this process up as a stunt. And I would continue to reach out above the media, direct with the American people, saying, listen, I am going to get this done for you. We need to put pressure on the obstructionists in the Democratic Party. Trump has shown great flexibility and willingness to actually negotiate. Nancy and Chuck are behaving like, people who think they have an inside game rigged, because they do, with the compliant mainstream media, have an inside game rigged. So I remain underwhelmed by Chuck Schumer, who has, if you check his Wikipedia page, I think the last I checked, he's still bragging about the fact that he got perfect SAT scores to get into Harvard. Evidently, you can do that and lose your mind over time, because the guy is displaying, political instincts that are going to, I think, cost the Democrats, cost him and cost the Democrats, and cost this country grievously.
Yeah, I mean, it was so inauthentic. Everything about that situation seemed inauthentic there. I felt like I was looking at bad acting. They're kind of, these two stiffs up there saying, they're arguing about protecting the border from people who are unknown entering, and they're saying it's a manufactured crisis. For years we've heard about drugs and crimes coming across the border. And of course, that's not to say that every person who immigrates is a criminal, but people trying to defy the legal process of immigration are. And by breaking the law in doing that, we can't selectively enforce this and decide, oh, well, this person is nice and means well, and these people are criminals bringing whatever kind of drugs and problems they might be bringing. I'm still absorbing fully this whole 60 Minutes thing with Anderson Cooper. It really seems to me like a promotional piece that's been very carefully put together. I think that people really need to dig into this campaign of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. How can someone, it would be one thing if we saw her there and she was immediately, a brilliant person with tons of insight and information. And a lot of people find Laura Loomer controversial, but certainly in a political debate, she is good at presenting her point of view. She's got a lot of facts and everything. And, we know that Laura is against radical Islam and a plan that has been put forward by the Muslim Brotherhood. She's told us about this explanatory memorandum, and certainly, speaking about things like that, there's no equivocation with Ocasio-Cortez. I feel like all we're hearing about are the gaffes and all that stuff. We saw this video of her dancing on the roof, and interestingly enough, Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, who was banned from Patreon, he did a good analysis of that roof video. You and I spoke about it and said there's really nothing embarrassing or bad about it. It's just a college-aged girl dancing on a roof with her friends. She doesn't do anything illegal or outrageous or embarrassing. So it almost seems like something that was put out there, maybe by the Democrats, to say, oh, look, they're now making fun of Cortez for dancing on a roof. They do things like that, right? Do something and then blame it on somebody else. In this interview with Anderson Cooper, she talks about being a radical and that these ideas are radical. And she talks about how FDR and various other presidents. I just find it difficult to imagine that she knew that stuff. It just seems very prompted, and they're positioning her as a radical. They're building a career for this woman that they want to thrust upon the public because I guess they feel like she's got the right ingredients.
I would suspect that, again, I'm not a political expert, but I would suspect that there are George Soros and his team and a lot of like-minded people following the Bush experiment, following then the Obama experiment, now with the Trump experiment, rightly are concerned, as you and I are concerned on previous broadcasts, about the fragile state, financial state of the global economy. There's too much debt on the planet. There's too much debt on America. Certain countries are in worse shape, far worse shape than the U.S. But we certainly approach a massive debt crisis. There may be a lull if this China deal turns out to be a thing. We're supposed to wait breathlessly for the latest on that any minute. We can have, temporary more time in purgatory before the real pain comes. But if you're somebody who's just modestly acquainted with finance, you look at the long bull market and you say all bull markets end eventually. Maybe this one will end in a crisis. Perhaps it'll be worse than 2007 or 8 or 9. And in such a crisis, which would really suit the Democrats in 2020, because they could say, look, Obama had us on the right track and we veered off into Never Never Land with Trump and the Republicans. We didn't have enough time to pull us back from the brink. This is all on Trump. This is all on Republican excess, would be, what the compliant mainstream media would be singing. And then what you want is a whole bunch of easily deluded scruffies and millennials, voting en masse where they did not in 2016, and maybe they did to a certain extent in 2018. And so maybe this is the Pied Piper for the scruffies, Alexandria. And, that would make sense as a political idea. You've got these people who, sadly, they come out of college. I interact with some of them, many of them. We have youngsters who recently got out of college and are thinking about, God forbid, going back there to graduate school. And you meet these type of people, their friends or whatever, who are funny, nice, and well-meaning, but what they don't know about reality. You have this guy, David Hogg, as an example, who's gotten into Harvard, who has, I think, recently tweeted out something that, there's nothing legitimate about in the history of the United States because the country was created on stolen land. And the guy's an idiot. How he got into Harvard is beyond me. But
that's another good example, Charles, because we see there seems to be this new generation. I'm sorry for interrupting you there, but there seems to be this new generation of, millennial candidates. It's almost like the Democrats are looking forward to, the future in a way that I can't even wrap my head around this. They really are just making the next, Britney Spears version of politicians that don't need to know anything. They just need to look good on camera and, say these things that they think will appeal to millennials and get them voting. Ocasio-Cortez is being covered in Teen Vogue. I mean, she's got to be the first politician to be covered in Teen Vogue. I don't think teenagers really care about what's going on in Congress, generally speaking. And as far as I know, Teen Vogue is about like makeup and, Leonardo DiCaprio and stuff like that. So it's just the inauthenticity of these candidates and the concept that they're saying these things that people want to hear, but are totally unrealistic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, she's not running for student body president of Boston University or wherever she went to. And in her next campaign and in this period where I think everyone will be tested if we have economic problems come, if we have global flashpoints erupt, everybody's going to be tested. And, hipster comments, off-the-hip hipster comments, are going to get, a lot of currency across traditional media and a lot of scrutiny from alternative media. And it's a long time between now and the next election. I think there'll be other fresh faces coming along, and there'll be other retreads in the mix. Hillary Clinton, to pick on her, which we have to do, I suppose, from time to time, was recently quoted as saying that she's now in favor in New York of abortion up until birth.
Well, in the case of Hillary Clinton, Charles, I'd be in favor of abortion up until the age of 70. How old is she?
Exactly, 71. Exactly. But yeah, I mean, to make a comment like that, I mean, across the quote civilized world, the norm is abortion is certainly not allowed. Once the fetus is viable, which is typically held to be after after how many weeks? 20 weeks?
I don't know.
Or something like that. But to say that, you're in favor that we have to rush in New York and adopt a new law where abortion is lawful until birth, I mean, that is really,
wow.
I mean, point of view that would say that is just mind-numbing. And so I say that to say there's no shortage of idiocy coming out of the mouths of politicians in both parties, which explains why Congress's approval rating is, I think, below the drinking age. I think it's below 21%.
I think Ebola has a higher approval rating than Congress. Another guy who's got a pretty low approval rating and falls into the category of idiot is Bill de Blasio. He just unveiled a sort of surprise, shock, universal health care plan for undocumented and low-income New Yorkers. I heard it was for everyone, but I mean, again, I have no issue with immigrants. Both of my ex-wives immigrated to the United States from foreign countries. They did it legally, of course. And the thing that I'm concerned about is this sort of this collection of programs being promoted by the Democrats that when you analyze the end game, it just seems like certain destruction. Because if you're promoting open borders and saying, hey, we've got this free health care for you here, why don't you undocumented people who have immigrated to the country illegally move to New York, and rather than becoming productive members of society, just come here, be undocumented, flout the rules, do whatever you want, and we're going to reward you with free health care that all of the people struggling to make ends meet, to work and earn a living and care for their families who came here legally and who are paying taxes and doing all the things that legal citizens of the United States do. They'll pay for your health care. That's fine.
Yeah, the approach here, I watched this actually on several talk shows that I can barely stand watching these days, but the counter arguments to Trump include the following bon mot. One, that, why do you care about the southern border? The real problem is immigrants who fly here and overstay their visas. Okay. What we're saying here is you need both. You need more vigilance on people who overstay their visas. There has to be a system, I would argue, when people come here by plane, they're vetted in advance, obviously, but because too many are overstaying their visas, perhaps there should be a bond requirement, or there should be some financial requirement in advance that before you come here, we know you're wonderful, you're going to check out, because too many people aren't playing by the rules. There's, on the one hand, going to be a penalty against the traveler, and then on the other hand, there's going to be, if this kind of stuff persists, then you get no foreign aid from the United States of America, Honduras, and Nicaragua, and all these other countries where there are the persistent problems. So then the other one I've heard, which is, really laughable, is that actually there isn't an illegal immigrant crime wave problem in the United States. That when the statistics that, of course, are carefully manufactured by these Professor Gruber-esque, reprehensibly fiction-oriented analysis people put together, they get together a pile of statistics that shows the native-born crime rate is higher in theory than the illegal immigrant crime rate. But of course, both of those populations can be massaged to make the statistics say whatever you want them to say.
Right.
I think other studies that I've seen show very clearly that the cost of crime of illegal immigrants is monstrous. Some say $100 billion per year.
Right.
And so if it's $100 billion per year, I don't think spending 5% of that on this year is an idiotic idea. I think, you could argue, if it were for climate change, if we would say that the cost of climate change was $100 billion per year, you'd have Democrats saying, see, that means we got to spend $10 trillion right away.
Well, that's the other hot button topic that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez likes to talk about is climate change. And look, you and I have spoken about this a little bit. I get more into this with David Hawkins. And the thing that's interesting, I find that they're often trying to turn these complex arguments into some kind of binary thing where either you believe in climate change or there's no place for you in a debate. And it's a complex issue. And I'm pretty confident that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez knows very little about it. The crux of it that David Hawkins speaks about is that carbon dioxide is actually not a problem. It is food for plants. It's a fertilizer gas, and it's something that each of us produce as a normal part of our respiration. There are other gases like sulfur monoxide and various poison chemicals that we're burning and putting into the atmosphere that are problematic, but because there is this overwhelming effort to shut down debate rather than have an intelligent debate, they don't want to talk about how the Chicago Climate Exchange, created by Al Gore and that guy Richard Sandor, or what's his name, something like that, is a way of monetizing the production of these poisonous pollutants, and they distract us with this carbon dioxide thing and selling people carbon credits. It becomes a money-making scheme, and what I find is Donald Trump has an uncanny knack for distilling an argument down into a 240-character insult that gets people triggered and goes crazy. But when he says that climate change is a hoax, I believe what he means is that excessive production of carbon dioxide is hardly a problem for the Earth. Plants would grow stronger and absorb the carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. So having these carbon credits and trying to charge people for the creation of carbon dioxide doesn't solve our problem. This Chicago Climate Exchange and various patents held by one of the creators of that climate exchange would seem to promote the production of some of the more dangerous pollutants that go into our environment. And I think these are issues that need to be studied more in depth and spoken about more in depth in a debate, rather than just having talking points where Ocasio-Cortez and another dummy, Anderson Cooper, just sit there kind of, promoting each other on 60 Minutes. How is Anderson Cooper even on 60 Minutes? I can't stand that guy. You just leave him on CNN.
Well, I think on the question of climate change, I'm old enough to remember in the 60s and 70s when people were talking about the great danger facing the planet was global cooling. Then it was global warming. Now it's global climate change. I think it's absolutely fair and in past being essential to study with reference to facts as much as possible. And there are good scientific facts hidden in the across the planet. What happened to complex societies that disappeared? I mean, that's a fair question. Why did that happen? Possibly it was a climate thing that impacted food supply or drinking water or something like that. It's absolutely fair to ask those questions. But what is not fair is to pitch it the way the greenies want to pitch it, is that what we need right away is a gigantic tax to go into this gigantic, unregulatable bureaucracy, of which, of course, I, the advocate, will administer fairly.
Right.
But me, you got to take the whole economic piece out of it and say, from a scientific perspective, let's examine together the evidence of threats that could be posed by swift and sudden changes, one way or another, in the climate that where humans are concentrated. I mean, those are fair questions, but I don't think science is advanced enough today to say that only one size fits all answer is the straitjacket that you got to sign up for. And by the way, you're going to pay a lot of money for each of these straitjackets. And what, in addition, we want you to do is, that whole energy complex that you're so used to. We'll just shut that down. Yeah,
right.
I mean, it's nonsensical, and it's Gruber-esque.
Yeah.
Same sort of guy, Professor Gruber, from MIT, who sold us Obamacare that was all wrong.
Yeah.
So I do think the study of these, from threats posed to humans and society by abrupt shifts in climate are worth thinking through. Threats posed by perhaps the abrupt shift in the magnetic poles, which has happened in the Earth. Yeah. Threats posed by an asteroid hitting the Earth. Of course, all these things are worth talking about. But let's have some rigorous analysis. It doesn't help that the long time series data that was fed to us as being right, people have now sheepishly had to admit it's all cooked. It's wrong.
Exactly. And you know, Charles, this is one of the primary reasons why I created Crowdsource the Truth, because I was so frustrated by the information being proliferated through the mainstream media and even social media. We can see the psychological impact of this type of discourse right here in our own comments section. Stephen Thames, who very probably is a well-meaning guy who is trying to find answers for himself, says record temperatures every year, not global warming, question mark. And I presume Stephen means that he thinks global warming is happening. I'm not saying that it isn't. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. The Earth is an incredibly complex system, and we can't just arrive at the conclusion that excess carbon dioxide is causing global warming and it's settled science. Don't debate it, don't look into it any further, or else you're crazy. I mean, that is not the way that science is done. And there are many scientists, again, I'm not saying that global warming is or isn't happening. I'm saying that they're trying to convince us that carbon dioxide is a major factor in global warming, and I disagree. I think it's a problem that we are creating chemicals and burning compounds and putting substances into the atmosphere that are problematic, but to be focusing on carbon production is a huge mistake. And again, like I said at the beginning of our call, Charles, I think for Ms. Cortez to just say, oh, she's got a Green New Deal, I don't think she's sufficiently qualified to determine what is or isn't a practical approach to solving these matters of pollution and climate and all that. I haven't heard anybody talk about why don't we invest in American technologies that could make lower friction automobiles, or somehow focus on making the internal combustion engine much more efficient so that our existing systems, I mean, there's, I think, a strong argument to be made that not building charging stations all over the country and not mining all of this lithium to make batteries for cars and filling up the world with batteries. We don't know what's going to happen when there's 1 billion battery-powered cars in junkyards around the world, how that's going to affect the climate.
Yeah, I mean, unless AOC is talking about a Green New Deal that involves a six-pack of beer and a whole bunch of guacamole for less than $10, I'm not particularly interested in hearing the details. I mean, and on the subject of climate change, I think the person who was asking the question there, we're talking about in the Earth, we're talking about at surface level a globe. We're talking about a globe, 30% of it roughly is covered in land, 70% is water. Mm-hmm. When we talk about temperatures changing, what are we talking about? Are we talking about temperatures in city centers? Are we talking about temperatures shoreline? Are we talking about temperatures underneath the ocean? It's a very, very complex set of issues that needs to be examined not over a 1 year, 5 year, or 10-year time frame. For questions like this, scientists I know, my father is a scientist, but forgetting him, scientists I know say, what is the right time scale to consider? I mean, when we see these geologic events, be they earthquakes, volcanoes erupting, forest fires, which are not really geological, when we see those events, they have a tremendous impact, far more than a factory operating or cars running or homes being heated and cooled. A gigantic impact on the atmosphere and on the temperature levels around the world. So this is not a problem that you put together while you're dancing on the roof, having won a surprise victory against an established political guy, because you've never taken a course, and then you just your people whisper into your ear and say, yeah, Green New Deal, let's go for it, trillions, all for us.
Yeah.
I mean, there needs to be far more careful consideration, especially because the United States right now is not exactly flush. I mean, we've got 20, 21, 22 trillion dollars in government debt, piling on another 13 to 30 trillion on top of that for some scheme is probably not as smart as paying down, say, 5 trillion of debt as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and just one last note on the climate change thing. There have been so many people coming out and saying, no climate deniers are allowed on the show. They always want to label people, If you question anything, you're a conspiracy theorist or a climate denier. But look, let's face it, there's almost no area of science, or at least anyone with a truly curious intellectual mind, that they would consider settled. there always seems to be an opportunity for new information or new understanding to change our perception of something related to science or medicine or any of these fields. So any scientist that would tell you, pencils down, that's it, we're not studying this anymore, we're not open to debate, that seems like the definition of ignorance.
Right? Exactly. Totally agree with that. That's why you got to crowdsource the truth.
Exactly. So, right, people are talking about how solar cycles affect the planet more. David Hawkins was telling us about how evaporation of seawater creates carbon dioxide, and the ocean, as you said, covering 70% of the planet. It's almost absurd to think that anything that humans could do could outweigh the effect of the ocean and the sun as far as anthropogenic climate change, man-made changes to the climate. I think pollution is what we should be focusing on, and we just don't hear. They're always trying to steer the conversation in their way. I want to take you back for a second, Charles, to this notion of, the very election of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, because we've heard so often that New York is not, it's not like this is somebody who came out of, Alaska or Montana or somewhere where there's a town with 6,000 people in it, and then she, pounded the pavement and did something amazing. New York is one of the largest, most expensive, most competitive, political regions in the country. I'm really curious to know how this could have come about, how she beat such a powerful incumbent and basically came out of nowhere to do this, and doesn't seem to know what she's talking about.
Well, I think that there are 435 congressional districts, and there are many that have the profile of a population that's not all that interested in politics, so you don't need to get that many primary votes, and voters that can be turned out to accomplish what happened in the primary, to get a Democrat across the line as the nominee who's far more to the left in a part of the country where no Republican stands a chance of winning. So, there are quite a few districts like that. Layer on top of that, the recent news out of California that there were a lot of illegal votes
right.
In the most recent election, and despite the fact that Trump said his Justice Department was going to make an issue of that. So there's a lot of, in short, manipulation that can happen. Also, we now hear about that guy, the LinkedIn founder, who has now has to admit that he contributed. It was a second contribution that this time went to put fake Facebook ads against Roy Moore in the Alabama Senate contest. So there's a lot of manipulation of the elections still going on, sad to say. And what Ocasio-Cortez and her ilk stand for are, the Tommy Steyer, et cetera, wing of the Democratic Party that believes that Nancy Pelosi is too much of a, quote, a moderate, and Chuck Schumer is too much, a moderate. Those type of people can win local races, but they're going to have very little impact on the national debate. And in my view, following a financial crash, if the world markets that will lend to the U.S., in theory, become convinced that we're going to become the next, that we're on the path to being Venezuela, you watch and see what happens. When you talk about the depression of 29 to 33 will be a picnic compared to what would happen.
Well, Ocasio-Cortez is focused on making us into Sweden, not Venezuela. So pick your flavor of country that's on its way to failure, and that's what she wants to do. Charles, I cannot shake the feeling that there is so much deception going on. I didn't know about this LinkedIn co-founder admitting to a misinformation campaign against Roy Moore. That's amazing. There was so much coverage when they were accusing him of wrongdoing, and now here is something in the wrap talking about the guy making that stuff up. The lack of integrity is really very troubling. There was another thing I wanted to talk to you about, Charles, was we heard an announcement, I think it was from Maxine Waters, who wanted to investigate Trump for money laundering, and then almost the very next day, we heard that this lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, who was linked to that Trump Tower meeting with Donald Trump Jr., was apparently charged in some unrelated case for money laundering. So it causes me to wonder. It seems like there's a lot of people who are very focused in setting up fake events, planting subversive infiltrators to convince people to do things and make it look like people are doing things, and then report in the news and say, oh, look at what this person is doing. Why does Maxine Waters think that they can just investigate Donald Trump and everybody he knows until they find something that's been done wrong? People have seemed to lost sight of the fact that it's not, investigated until proven guilty. It's presumed innocent until proven guilty, and there needs to be some evidence of a crime before you do that. You can't just go through every single document and every single thing in somebody's office or house the way they did with Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort and find stuff to charge them with, or Dr. Corsi for that matter.
Well, I think generally speaking, that it is certainly the law of the land that you have to have probable cause of a crime before
Right.
you can start raiding houses and stuff like that. And that's generally, that is true. But now we have this spectacle here in New York of the incoming, I guess, freshly sworn in Attorney General saying, no, that's not the way it's going to work anymore. We're going to investigate people, not crimes. And she could say that, and maybe Xavier Becerra up there in California could say these type of things and go down that path, sure in the knowledge that any type of federal challenge will take a long time to get ultimately to the Supreme Court, where it will find itself, and where this type of behavior of state AGs in New York and California, possibly elsewhere, will be shot down. We've been watching under the Trump administration, and it continues to this day, a Department of Justice that is certainly gone rogue. We hear Tom Fitton complaining about Trump's Justice Department behaving, even now in 2019, in the worst ways of the Obama administration. So there's a lingering stench in the judicial branch of government, particularly in the Department of Justice. Let's hope the new person at the IRS is making progress, but that's going to be a tough slog to get right.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. And people across the spectrum should be saying, wait a minute. We don't want the political class to get this new currency that suddenly, we really have to hang on every election, because if the wrong party wins, then suddenly we're going to be a target. And we can't accept that, whether we're independent, Democrat, Republican, whatever. That is not. Justice is supposed to be blind.
Yeah.
And, I think what the political class in both parties is trying to do is make itself more relevant.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to do it, from the Democratic side at least, with lies. There was an interesting piece I saw. It was from MSNBC, of all things, where a CIA analyst, I actually saw it on Jimmy Dore. He was talking about how this CIA analyst, or maybe he was a professor, I forget. No, it was a professor debating a CIA analyst. And the professor was saying how pulling out of Syria was an absolutely imperative thing to do, that the United States is just, as you've said many times, running ripshod over the Middle East and creating a disaster. The focus in Syria, of course, has been regime change. We've seen all the photos of the now departed John McCain hanging out with the Free Syrian Army. And of course, when Donald Trump says he wants to end the war in Syria, take U.S. troops out of Syria, bring them back to the United States, something that would seem to cut expenses and allow us to redirect funds that are being spent destroying countries in the Middle East to things that would help us here in the United States. I also find it curious that all of these people who are so focused on convincing us that carbon dioxide is creating an environmental problem don't seem to care about the depleted uranium munitions that have been dropped in the Middle East for 17 years. Where's an environmental study of how that is affecting the Earth? Why is no one concerned about the ongoing, now I think it's an 8 years long crisis in Fukushima, where dangerous cesium and other radioactive materials are being leaked into the environment? They're focused on carbon dioxide. So I'm not saying, having a debate about global warming, I think, is we're not even talking about the right thing. We need to talk about polluting the environment with dangerous chemicals, not charging people $15 to buy a carbon dioxide credit when they purchase a plane ticket.
Right, I agree.
Yeah,
And
it's
on
like,
Syria, I mean, we've had this, Trump saying he's going to pull troops out quickly, Bolton going over to see that tyrant Erdogan and being shown the back of Erdogan wouldn't even meet with him. I think the sticking point for me in thinking through Syria is that we did encourage and benefit from the Kurds in the fight against ISIS, which is not completely over yet, and to leave them behind to be slaughtered by Erdogan and the Turks doesn't strike me as a sensible thing for the United States to do. After all, we did. Maybe you say it was under Obama, and Trump would have done it slightly differently, but nonetheless, the United States of America did encourage these Kurds to come, band together and to work with us, and they were, by all accounts, extremely effective against ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call it. And I think we owe more than just a debt of gratitude to them. And so how that gets handled, I don't know, but certainly acceding to Erdogan and saying, okay, yeah, you go ahead, we'll turn a blind eye as you slaughter them, doesn't strike me as a very smart thing to do either.
well, is that not something that Russia would help? I mean, Russia's in there defending their ally Syria, and I mean, that's the thing. We never know what's true. We're hearing that ISIS is being defeated over there. In a general sense, I kind of agree with the notion that us not perpetuating wars in countries that are so far away from the United States that we went to in defiance of international law and the UN and all that stuff, it seems like generally a good idea to not be there.
Well, so as I understand, I'm no expert on this, but as I understand the Kurdish problem, there are populations of Kurds in Iraq, where the oil is, in Syria, and in Turkey. And different proponents of the Kurds argue for the creation of an independent state that would take territory from possibly each of those three countries, including oil-bearing regions in Iraq. And you can imagine why people in Iraq and Turkey and Syria might say, now, wait a minute, that's not all that great an idea. Imagine if, for example, we had a similar population, let's say in Oklahoma and Texas and New Mexico, wanting to get together, and it just so happened that they wanted the Permian Oil Basin as part of their new state. I think we would, this is a high degree of difficulty problem to resolve.
Right.
And I think, we owe it to the Kurds, our allies in the fight against, or certain Kurds in the fight against ISIS. We owe it to them to think this through carefully and not rush out. But we also owe it to young men and women who are in our fighting forces not to commit them willy-nilly to the battle of the moment and then, leave them at war for 17 years. I mean, it's bad enough to be killed in conflict, but it's even worse. Some of these brave people go over there, they suffer emotional disabilities, they suffer physical disabilities, grievous ones. And the
Not to
armchair
mention the
people,
families, Charles. We've got with us in the comments right now, coincidentally, Shay Watson is saying she's a Gulf War widow, depleted uranium and anthrax vaccine.
right?
It's very bad.
Yeah, I mean,
So Trump can't win.
families.
It seems I'm sorry to step on you there, but whatever he says, they just want to go against him. As he pointed out in his speech, Chuck Schumer and other Democrats have voted for a barrier of some kind on the border and funding for protection of the border in the past. Everything they're doing now seems specifically and exclusively obstructionist, simply for the reason that they want to make Donald Trump look bad. They have now, as we've come into 2019, fully entered into stop Trump from getting reelected in 2020 mode. When we hear Hillary Clinton talking about the dangers of leaving Syria and the dangerous people who are in Syria who want to kill us, well, how can she not address the dangerous people from countries south of the border who utilize, or I should rather say, take advantage of the porous border between Mexico and the United States to enter the country illegally and do actual harm to us?
Not to mention the very dangerous people who live in Chappaqua and a mansion in Washington, D.C.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Charles, I appreciate your flexibility in accommodating my travel schedule, and I apologize that we didn't have a full Charles Ortel is Closing In episode today, but I will be back in time for Sunday with Charles, and I'm sure you are preparing another thought-provoking episode for fans of Crowdsource the Truth. Is there anything that you wanted to cover before we wrap it up right now?
No, well, just safe travels and get home.
Yep, absolutely. I want to thank you, Charles, for joining me. I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to remind everyone that Crowdsource the Truth is a viewer-sponsored news resource, and if you enjoy the show and you're watching daily, I hope you'll go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become a sponsor. You can also send a one-time sponsorship payment by going to paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth. Charles, I think I might make this DUMBY image into a coffee mug. It's certainly going to be part of the Screensaver Volume 2. As I've reminded you and our viewers each week, people who become sponsors of the show for $10 or more are going to receive that Sunday with Charles Screensaver Volume 1. So that's been flying off the shelves, and people seem to really be enjoying it. Charles, have a great evening. Thanks for joining me. I will see you soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Jason. You too.
Take care.